Here are the receivers at 1BCG. Note the storage batteries under the table to light the filaments. By the way, the only source of heat in this small building was a small kerosene stove. The receiver was the best at the time, an Adams Morgan RA-10. A Magnavox horn speaker is at right, and one can see a pair of Baldwin headphones on the table. The receiver at upper left with the honeycomb coils was used to tune in the long-wave commercial station at New Brunswick, which sent out the reports and the results of the tests. As customary for the time, the tuning unit was in one cabinet and the detector and audio stages in another. The tuner, in this case, was the RA-10, and the detector and audio unit known as the DA-2. The set is greatly sought by the radio collector. Of interest, the circuit was designed by Paul Godley, whom we will hear more of later. The set worked well on both CW as well as on spark signals. The tuning range, I believe, was somewhere between 150 to 700 meters. Each tube drew 1 ampere on the filament. This was later reduced to a 1/4 ampere and became the UV201A. Paul Godley, 2ZE, from Montclair, New Jersey. Godley was a well-known set designer and DXer. Following the instructions of Harold Beveridge of RCA, he and his assistant erected a 1,300-foot length antenna pointed toward North America. The antenna averaged 12 feet off the ground and was terminated at the far end with a 400-ohm resistor. This was, and still is, the famous Beveridge antenna, still used by many amateurs for 80 and 160-meter operation. Godley used the regenerative RA-10 receiver plus the ultimate for the time, the newly designed superheterodyne. This is the superhet circuit. All triodes, since it was before the multi-element tube with high gain. Note the many resistance-coupled IF stages instead of transformers. This is an early IF amplifier and detector on display at the AWA Museum. It was personally made by Major Armstrong and may be the oldest of its kind in existence. Of passing interest, a small, modern, solid-state IC chip the size of one's fingernail would have far more gain than this 4-foot unit. Godley kept a log of all reception under the most trying conditions in the wind-blown tent. While back in America, 1BCG and others were sending and hoping Godley would receive their signals. In time, Godley not only received 1BCG, but several other stations, including several using spark transmitters. The Atlantic had been conquered. And then came the big moment. 1BCG sent a complete message, preamble, text, and signature, which was received solid by Godley, the first complete message ever sent and received across the Atlantic. Ironically, the verification of the reception was sent by the huge RCA 200,000-watt long-wave station in New Jersey, which I had shown earlier. The test proved that it was no longer necessary to use high power on long waves to span the Atlantic. QST headlined the news. Note the call letters 2BML at Riverhead. 2BML was Dr. Harold Beveridge, the designer of the Beveridge antenna used so successfully by Godley. I took this picture of Harold several years ago on a visit to RCA Riverhead. If you think 1BCG and others were on shortwave as we know it, you're wrong. Any wavelength under 500 meters in those days was short wave. All the transmissions from 1 BCG were on 230 meters, the same as our AM broadcast band. Others also operated around 200 meters. There was no 80 or 160 meter band at that time. 1 BCG was the most consistent station heard, and the only one to send a complete message. However, as I said before, there were others that got across, some running far less power and, as noted earlier, using spark transmitters. It was the beginning of a new era in communication. It was a signal to abandon the long ways and go to the shorter wavelengths for distant communication. The ARRL, which initiated the tests, had their representative Paul Godley write a complete report, and the local newspaper in Greenwich, Connecticut gave their native son much credit for his outstanding station. David Sarnoff of RCA and others came to investigate. It was most fortunate that a commercial photographer was present to take this picture. At far left is the famous Professor Michael Pupin, well-known inventor, physicist, and Armstrong's mentor. In 1950, members of the Radio Club of America erected a memorial on the site of 1 BCG to commemorate the great event. The monument can be seen today near the intersection of Clapboard Ridge Road and North Street in East Greenwich. It is within 200 feet of the original station site. It could well be the only monument ever erected to an amateur radio station. It is believed 1 BCG was the world's first high-power, modern amateur radio station. Commercial interests slowly abandoned their long-wave stations for ones of higher frequencies. And among them was a high-power, long-wave station mentioned earlier at New Brunswick. I was most fortunate to have known Paul Godley. Some years ago, he made a recording telling of his hearing 1 BCG in December 1921.
Here's my story on it. Most people will remember that in 1921, the American Radio Relay League chose me as official receiving operator to go to the British Isles and listen for signals from American amateurs during those epical transatlantic tests. The first signal I heard in Scotland from an American amateur station was one which, oddly enough, was sending the letters PF, PF, PF over and over again. Now that happened to be my own personal sign, as a telegrapher would say. And then, to my astonishment, came, "Hello, Paul," and the code number 73, which of course means best wishes. And that was followed by the call letters 1 BCG.
This is the last picture I took of Paul, who is at left. Next is Bill Halligan of Hallicrafters, then Harry Houck of the 1 BCG Memorial Committee. The lady is my wife. Paul died in October 1973. And so ends my little story of a great event in amateur radio. What followed? Spark transmitters went off the air the following year, and amateurs were soon operating below 100 meters.